All right, well, again, welcome to session 2 of our Soup and Bread lecture series. This session, of course, last week we talked about Tolkien's faith, his life, and we also did an overview of a grammar of Tolkien, or the important points in his entire work. This week we are moving forward, and we will talk about creation, subcreation, and myth. Most people believe they know what myth is. They assume it means something untrue, perhaps beautiful, perhaps moving, perhaps psychologically powerful, but ultimately unreal, a relic of a pre-scientific age, a poetic understanding of the cosmos before microscopes and mathematics corrected our naivete. And because they assume this about myth, they assume they understand Tolkien. He wrote fantasy. He invented languages. He drew maps of places that never existed. Hobbits, elves, dark towers, imaginative, elaborate, perhaps an escape. But what if the assumption is not merely shallow? What if it is inverted? What if Tolkien did not write fantasy to escape reality, but because he believed reality itself is a work of art? What if Middle-earth is not an alternative to the world, but an argument about the world? To answer that, we must begin not with films, but with Tolkien's own mind. Tolkien was not a hobbyist. He was a philologist of the highest order, a man who devoted his life to the structure of words, to the deep grammar of ancient languages, to the sediment memory of myth across civilizations. And of course, he was a devout Catholic who attended daily mass, who prayed with disciplined fidelity, who believed in a created order sustained by divine reason. These were not two separate identities, scholar and believer, but they formed a single person. At the heart of this vision of his was a conviction that our age rests with quiet ferocity, that the world is not self-originating, not accidental, not mute matter drifting in cold expansion. The world, Tolkien believed, was made. And it was made intentionally, meaningfully, beautifully. And if the world is made, then it bears the marks of its maker, possesses order, coherence, goodness prior to our manipulation of it. The world is not raw material for will, it is gift. And from that conviction flows everything else. His stories, languages, the defense of myth, and even his understanding of the human imagination. If we are to understand how these elements cohere, we must turn to the sources in which Tolkien explains himself. And there are 3 basic texts that will guide us tonight. First is his essay on fairy stories, which was originally delivered as a lecture in 1939. Tolkien here does not defend children's literature. He articulates a metaphysics or a philosophy of imagination. There he insists that fantasy remains a human right, which is a theological thought. Human creativity is derivative, it's secondary, because human beings themselves are derivative or secondary. We make because we have been made. He presses the point further in his epic poem Mythopoeia, which is written after a debate with C.S. Lewis. He writes, "We make still by the law in which we're made." That single line contains an entire theology of human creativity. The imagination is not autonomous, but it participates in order. Myth, therefore, is not the invention of falsehood. It is the shaping of memory and meaning within the limits of our created reality. And that conviction becomes even more explicit in the poem, where Tolkien writes, "The heart of man is not compound of lies, but draws some wisdom from the only wise. and still recalls him. Notice the claim. The human heart is not fundamentally deceptive, it is derivative. It draws wisdom. Even myth, therefore, is not fabrication. It is memory refracted through imagination. Storytelling is rooted in anthropology, or the study of the human person. If we're made by a rational creator, then our reason and imagination are not evolutionary accidents. They are participations. And this metaphysical foundation does not remain abstract. It is dramatized in the architecture of his legendarium, or the large corpus of his works. The Silmarillion opens with a quest. Not even a quest, but with music. Creation begins in harmony before it becomes matter. The world is sung before it is shaped. Even discord is woven into greater theme. This is not narrative ornament, it is ontology, or the study of being itself. Being is good. Creation is intentional. Disorder is there, but it is secondary. His fiction rests upon a Catholic vision of reality in which the world is not self-originating, but made. So tonight we're not approaching Tolkien primarily as fans. We are approaching him as a thinker, a Catholic intellectual who believed that reality is created, that human beings participate in that created order, and that myth is one of the ways the human mind apprehends truth. Our evening will unfold in a symphony of two movements. In the first, we'll listen to Tolkien himself. What did he mean by creation? What did he mean by subcreation? And what does he mean by myth? Looking directly on fairy stories, at the music of the Ainur and the Silmarillion, and at his mythopoeia as conveyors of theological claims. It's then that we'll turn to our second movement to see those ideas embodied, but not in some sort of abstract way, but alive in Middle-earth and visible for us, particularly in selected scenes from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. We'll ask whether the architecture of his thought actually holds. Does Middle-earth display internal coherence? Does it manifest the discipline of subcreation? Does it function mythically in the way Tolkien describes? Because if the world is made, then it bears meaning. It possesses structure. It is intelligible. And if human beings are made within that world and made in the image of a creator, then our capacity to imagine, to shape language, to construct coherent worlds is not entertainment, but again, participation. And that's why Tolkien coined the word subcreation. The storyteller, he writes, becomes a successful subcreator when he constructs a secondary world with inner consistency of reality. And in that, we're not rival to creator, but again, participant. Not inventor of being, but shaper within being. Myth in this vision is not the opposite of truth, and we need to eliminate that thought from our minds. It is the path that truth takes when it refuses to remain confined to a syllogism or a logical problem, and instead clothes itself in a story. When it passes through the imagination so that it may be known not only by the mind, but by the whole person. If Tolkien is right, then fantasy is not escape, but it is echo. The imagination then becomes employed as vocation, a response to a world that is already sung before we ever spoke. If it is so, if the imagination is vocation and not diversion, then we must ask a first question. What kind of world makes such a vocation possible? What must reality be like for myth to bear truth? What must the human person be like for story to be participation and not just fabrication? Therefore, before we examine Middle-earth, we must examine the convictions beneath it. For Tolkien did not begin with hobbits. He began with an underlying philosophy, with a claim about creation itself. And from this claim flows his understanding of the human person, and from that, understanding myth as mode of truth. So in this first movement, we will listen to Tolkien himself, employing his stories and beginning wrong way. Well, that doesn't bode well for the rest of the night. So we begin this first part with the song beneath the story. Creation. Yeah. We'll make it one way or another. Tolkien's literary vision rests upon a prior metaphysical claim. The reality is created, ordered, and meaningful. So we know here we don't begin with fantasy, but again, ontology. And once more, ontology is the philosophical study of being. It is literally the study of what is. And he will make the claim that without an intelligible primary world, secondary worlds have no coherence. And also understanding that creation is gift. And the gift is received. Gift bears meaning independent of what we want or what our will is. And if the world is a gift, it means that it comes with its own meaning before we have a say in anything. That the meaning precedes our invention within it, that the structure precedes any storytelling that we may do, and that the imagination responds rather than imposes. And this is what allows and prepares for what Tolkien will talk about in sub-creation. So we must understand exactly how the order works, that we have creation that is not of our own, that we are sub-creators and using the stuff of creation, and it is in that myth then forms. So to see how he understands creation and how it played out in his own universe of Middle-earth, we turn to the Silmarillion. Specifically, we turn to the first part of the Silmarillion, which is the Ainulindale. Don't worry. The Ainulindale, which is Elvish for the music of the Ainur. Before we have to place the Silmarillion in its proper context. The Hobbit is the book of Bilbo and the journey that he takes. The events in that story happen before the events in the story that is the Lord of the Rings. The Silmarillion is everything that happens before the Hobbit from the beginning of the world. Again, this first part of the Silmarillion is what's called the music of the Ainur, the Ainulindale. And it is, man, I must be spreading it everywhere. I promise I'm not contagious. And in fact, what we have is his creation story, his creation myth. And it is created through music. There was Eru, the one, who in Arda is called Ilúvatar. And he made first the Ainur, the holy ones, that were the offspring of his thought, and they were with him before aught else was made. And he spoke to them, propounding to them themes of music. And they sang before him, and he was glad. But for a long while, they sang only each alone, or but few together, while the rest hearkened. For each comprehended only that part of the mind of Ilúvatar from which he came. And in the understanding of their brethren they grew but slowly. Yet ever as they listened, they came to deeper understanding and increased in unison and harmony. And it came to pass that Ilúvatar called together all the Ainur and declared to them a mighty theme, unfolding to them things greater and more wonderful than he had yet revealed. And the glory of his beginning and the splendor of its end amazed the Ainur. So they bowed before Ilúvatar and were silent. Then Ilúvatar said to them, of the theme that I have declared to you, I will now that ye make in harmony together a great music. And since I have kindled you with the flame imperishable, you shall know forth your powers in adorning this theme, each with his own thoughts and devices, if he will. But I win, sit and hearken, and be glad that through you great beauty has been wakened into song. So again, the world begins in harmony. It's music that arises, from music arises matter, creation itself. And what's I think important here is to to point to that Tolkien doesn't describe like assembly or like putting it together. He just describes composition. The creation is art, but structured. And harmony and theme, right? So there's harmony amongst the Ainur. So think of the Ainur as like the angels. There are two like ranks of them, but that's not necessarily important here. The Ainur are the first ones created. They're the ones that are around the one God. And it is the one God who puts into these angels this theme that they know specifically their own part of the theme. It's only when they are singing together that the harmony, the symphony that is creation arises. But, as with all things, someone can't leave well enough alone. Discord enters into the theme. Yes?
Who are you raising for me? Who are you? I'm remembering Narnia Book 1.
Yeah.
When they meet Aslan before they know he's Aslan.
Yeah.
And he starts creating in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't there just music, isn't it?
Yes, I believe there. Yes.
Is there any similarity because since they knew each other, or is it just coincidental?
I'm not entirely sure, to be honest with you. My knowledge of C.S. Lewis is about that far. But yeah, it is not. I don't think it's a happy coincidence. If I were to hazard a guess, so.
I don't know much about any of this.
Right.
But I picked that up. That's exciting.
Perfect. So yes, discord enters into the theme. But when they were come into the void, Iluvatar said, that's the wrong one. But now Iluvatar sat and hearkened, and for a great while it seemed good to him. For in the music there were no flaws. But as the theme progressed, it came into the heart of Melkor to interweave matters of his own imagining that were not in accord with the theme of Iluvatar. For he sought therein to increase the power and glory of the part assigned to himself. To Melkor among the Ainur had been given the greatest gifts of power and knowledge, and he had a share in all the gifts of his brethren. He had gone often alone into the void places, seeking the imperishable fire. For desire grew hot within him to bring into being things of his own, and it seemed to him that Iluvatar took no thought for the void, and he was impatient of its emptiness. Yet he found not the fire, for it is with Iluvatar. But being alone, he had begun to conceive thoughts of his own, unlike those of his brethren. So even though the discord begins, well, it doesn't even begin when he starts singing, it begins in the heart. It begins in the thought. It begins prior to action. But when they were come into the void, Iluvatar said to them, "Behold your music." And he showed to them a vision, giving to them sight where before was only hearing, Arid, they saw a new world made visible before them, and it was globed amid the void, and it was sustained therein, but was not of it. And as they looked and wondered, this world began to unfold its history, and it seemed to them that it lived and grew. And when the Ainur had gazed for a while and were silent, Iluvatar said again, "Behold your music. This is your minstrelsy. And each of you shall find contained herein, amid the design that I set before you, all those things which it may seem that he himself devised or added. And thou, Melkor, wilt discover all the secret thoughts of thy mind, and wilt perceive that they are but a part of the whole and tributary to its glory." In the grand, in the entire story of the Ainulindale, as the theme comes out and the Ainur begin to sing, Melkor begins to sing his own discordant hymn theme, which is then stopped by Iluvatar, and he gives another theme, and then Melkor does it again. Stop. Melkor does it again. Stop. But what we see is that even with his own discord in the great music, Iluvatar wove it into a greater harmony, making what was once deficient something even better than what began. And what I think we can point to here is to an understanding that evil lacks being. It's not, it doesn't exist. It's a privation of the good. It's, again, I think we talked about it last week. It's like darkness. Darkness has no being. Darkness is the absence or the privation of the light. And even in this creation myth, understanding that Melkor had nothing of his own. He had to take what was already before him and he corrupted it. This is where discord comes from. It comes from good being corrupted. I think I need to double down on that point, that creation is good. It was made good. Yes.
So what it's saying is that he became evil basically took over, but he became greedy, and the more power he got, the more he wanted.
Yep. So it was exactly that. It was he had a disordered desire. And his desire was to be greater than what he was, even though he was, as Tolkien says, the greatest of the Ainur. And in it, you can almost see echoes of, and again, I'm just putting these together, but seeing in this the rebellion of Satan in John Milton's Paradise Lost, where Satan in the poem truly believes that he can dethrone God himself. So it's a disordered desire that even though he had a certain greatest status, he wanted more. So there's discontent, there's corruption, there's just a lack of gratitude, and I mean everything else that we associate that ultimately ends up corrupting.
So of course then, with all that going on, Satan's gonna do everything he can to give you whatever you want, to make you feel like you're the king.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hold on to that thought. We'll come back to it. I think it's next week. We'll come back to it next week. So what we can see in the Undimmed, or what we can see in Tolkien's creation myth, is a truly Catholic metaphysics at work, or a Catholic philosophy of understanding. So we just heard how creation was narrated in music. So this particular section is going to ask what theological convictions are operating beneath this story, which is true myth. And it's these, that creation is ex nihilo, or which is Latin for out of nothing. That being is good, that evil is privation, and that participation defines our creatureliness, or creaturehood, if you will. So creation ex nihilo, again, means that God creates from nothing. That creation is not a rearrangement of pre-existent material, and that in fact God creates out of love. So being, creation, is gift. If we consider the story, Iluvatar alone gives being. The Ainur participate in the music, but they do not originate its existence. Creation is therefore dependent, which means that all creatures are contingent. Nothing is self-originating. The second one, being is good. We understand that being and goodness are like two sides of the same coin. To be, or to be created as being is good. God is, that's the divine name in Hebrew. I am that am, or I am who are, however you want to pronounce or however you want to translate the ancient Hebrew, points to, what is God saying by claiming his name is I am, claims that he is existence. That he himself is the only thing that does exist. He is being itself. So if we participate in being because we were made by a good being, then we too were created good. I think this is important to understand. Again, I think I mentioned it last week, that in being created by a good creator, even though we exist in a fallen world, we are good. We are created good. Fallen, but good. So being is good. To exist is in itself good, which means that if we look at the story again, we have creation beginning in harmony, that the world is not morally neutral, but that it is created good, and disorder is introduced by someone, something within the order itself. And again, the idea that evil is a privation. So again, the idea that evil does not exist. It is a lack, it's a distortion. It is the privation of good. And going back one more to the story, Then Iluvatar spoke, and he said, Mighty are the Ainur, and mightiest among them is Melkor. But that he may know, and all the Ainur, that I am Iluvatar, those things that ye have sung, I will show them forth, that ye may see what ye have done. And thou, Melkor, shalt see that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me. Nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself hath not imagined. Discord does not create new being. It just distorts the given theme, and it cannot stand by itself. So, which is why we understand that even in Tolkien's created world, evil never creates, it merely corrupts. And this applies to the idea of what we'll later encounter with the ring, with power, with corruption, and indeed with the orcs. And think about this. At the Easter Vigil, there are so many things that happen at that celebration, that liturgy, that only happen that night. And one of those is the Paschal Proclamation, or the Exultet. And one of the lines in there that if you've never gone to an Easter Vigil, it's long. We're talking 3 hours. But it's beautiful and worth it. There's a couple of lines inside of that rather long, but again, beautiful hymn of praise to the Paschal candle itself. O happy fault, O truly necessary sin of Adam. O happy fault, O truly necessary sin of Adam, that gained for us a Redeemer. Saying that, and it's pointing to a very deep truth, that had we not fallen, Christ would not have come. And in the fall of Adam, we receive something so much more beautiful in the incarnation of our God, who comes to redeem us, who takes what was used to corrupt, body, material, death, and conquers it through those: body, cross, death. So, if creation is gift and creatures exist by participation in the things of God, then human creativity cannot be autonomous. It must be secondary. And that leads to an understanding or a discussion of the human person themselves. We have been created imago Dei, in the image of God. So, if the world is made, and if human beings are made in the image of a creator, therefore it follows that human beings will also make. And again, this points back to ontology, the study of being, for it speaks about who we are which is a creature created in the image of a creator. For this understanding, we turn from the Silmarillion to the poem Mythopoeia, which is, it's Greek, that means myth maker. And that is the poem that he wrote, Tolkien wrote, after an argument with someone, getting a letter basically saying that myth is lies, but just dressed in silver. This is one part, by you, of the longer poem. The heart of man is not compound of lies, but draws some wisdom from the only wise, and still recalls him. Though now long estranged, man is not wholly lost, nor wholly changed. Disgraced he may be, yet is not dethroned, and keeps the rags of lordship one he owned. His world dominion by creative act, not his to worship the great artifact. Man, sub-creator, the reflected light, through which is splintered from a single white to many hues and endlessly combined in living shapes that move from mind to mind. Through all the crannies of the world we filled with elves and goblins, though we dared to build gods and their houses out of dark and light, and sow the seed of dragons, 'twas our right, used or misused. The right has not decayed. We make still by the law in which we are made. We make still by the law in which we were made. If we break that down specifically, we make means creativity is a universal. We make. Still, we make still. Meaning even this making, this creation happens in our fallen world by the law. Meaning creativity is not orderless, but creation itself is governed, in which we are made. Our creative action is rooted in the action of the Creator. So when we truly create, and not whatever, but when we truly create something, when we participate in art, whatever that may look like, this is not rebellion in the sense of the one that introduced his own theme, but it is our inheritance, it is our right to create. So if it is our right to create, we must recognize that we are sub-creators. This shifts to his essay, again given his lecture on fairy stories. Fantasy remains a human right. We make in our own measure and in our derivative mode because we are made. And not only made, but made in the image and likeness of a maker. So primary creation, again, we're looking at the real world, the outside world, what we live and inhabit right now. Knowing that God alone creates this, that it is out of nothing, that everything that exists was created by God from nothing. Which then points to subcreation, again, just really want to drag this one out, that subcreation is making with what is given. That it is derivative, it is based on his, and that it is disciplined because it is ordered, it exists within an order. So in constructing a secondary world, which is ultimately what Tolkien did, we have to understand what he was trying to accomplish and what it means for sub-creation to be successful, if we want to say it that way. Children are capable, of course, of literary belief when the storymaker's art is good enough to produce it. That state of mind has been called willing suspension of disbelief. But this does not seem to me to be a good description of what happens. What really happens is that the storymaker proves a successful sub-creator. He makes a secondary world which your mind can enter. Inside it, what he relates is true. It accords with the laws of that world. You therefore believe it while you are, as it were, inside. The moment disbelief arises, the spell is broken. The magic, or rather art, has failed. To illustrate this, I'm going to move to my other, nerdy, Star Wars. You've seen the original trilogy. Episodes 4, 5, and 6. Hopefully, at least you know what I'm talking about. And those were the best ones. We were there, we were in the story, it doesn't matter. We were in the galaxy long ago, in a galaxy far, far away, Then the prequel movies, trilogy came out. And I don't know about you, but they were There's a good story about watching the Empire, the Republic fall into Empire. I could have done without the giant, mushy, love story jammed in your face between Anakin and Padme. But, it is what it is. But even in that, you could still participate. You could still be inside the world. That all changed with the sequel trilogy. Amongst the many, many, many horrible things that happened in the sequel trilogy, I think the worst was that scene. You guys see it? No. Don't. There is a scene in one of the movies where Carrie Fisher's character, Princess Leia, is her ship is hit with a laser beam, and the glass shatters, and she's sucked out, and force kung fu's back into, and it's fine. And that's what I mean. That's what he means when he's when disbelief arises. I sitting in the movie theater thinking, this is dumb. This is dumb.
It broke Star Wars dogma.
Exactly. It just broke everything, and the story was bad, and yes. So that idea of you're sitting there in the movie theater and then something that arises that is so ridiculous or so out of place that you're like, what? Immediately you're taken out of the story, you no longer believe, everything collapses. Which means that belief arises when the world holds together, when it makes sense internally, which requires sub-creation to have a similar structure with patience and an internal logic. And more than that, it means that it should have a certain fidelity to the primary world's intelligibility. And that's what he refers to as the inner consistency of reality. fantasy, writing in non-fairy stories, fantasy may be, as I think, not less but more subcreative. But at any rate, it is found in practice that the inner consistency of reality is more difficult to produce, the more unlike are the images and the rearrangements of primary material to the actual arrangements of the primary world. In that essay, he refers to a green sun. We can conceive of it, but it would take an awful lot of effort and labor for us to come to inside the story to believe that that is actually possible, that to see it as green. I mean, you can see it, but we don't believe it. So it properly understood, meaning that the author would then have to create and put a lot of effort into creating the story around the idea that the sun, it makes sense that the sun is green. And not just because, well, I woke up today and I decided it was going to be green. So here's just an expanded thought on what subcreation means. So to participate versus to dominate, or to be autonomous within the act of subcreating. To be faithful is to receive the limits and to honor the structure that is existent. Whereas if you were, again, the idea of green sun, it's autonomous of anything that we can think of. So, yes?
When you first started talking about
Melkor, yes.
for some reason the first thing I thought of was Martin Luther.
Okay.
And every kind of slide as you went, there could be some like type of parallels to what he was trying to do and trying to create. And there was like limits and there's some structure, but it was creating with something that was he was trying to subcreate.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, there's so many parallels. Now, once it came into my mind, then it's just like every slide, I'm just like, man, there is a lot of, there could be a lot to be, he could be part of this sort of like learning structure, or at least he is in my mind,
Yeah.
while I'm going through this. But now, when we get to this, that's where I'm like, okay, so he was sub-creating out of discord. And so there was evil to it, and it wasn't the right participation of sub-creation because he goes into the autonomous making.
Mm-hmm.
But he still kind of stayed within the received limits and structure, so it kind of gets a little...
Yeah, it's interesting that you point that out, and I think one thing that is, and this points to the idea of, and again, I'm not trying to say that our Protestant brothers and sisters are corrupted, but it speaks to the idea of corruption of the good, right? So you have what you receive, but in trying to craft what it is that you think it needs to be, it ends up being a corruption of what is already there. So in certain Protestant theologies, that's how that, a lot of it is morphed along the way to the point where it's almost, some of the Protestants sects, denominations are very far away from where we started.
Well, like, the Latter-day Saints, they kind of, that was another person kind of taking the discord in sub-creating and just getting farther and farther and farther away, and then everybody's just trying to sub-create from the creation. So it's really interesting, and now I can't get it out of my head. And I can't focus on, like, the actual thing. I'm trying to, like, make all these parallels in my mind, but I just, like, yeah, something kind of just, if anyone else was thinking about it, or just me, but yeah, no, it's not that people are evil,
Right.
but it's just how there was something that was created, and there was some discord in that creation, and kind of then the through line through it all.
Mhm.
Don't worry, it's happening over here too.
Yes, we're humans, right? Yeah, we're human. But just kind of, it further solidifies that J.R.R. Tolkien was wise beyond imagination.
Mm-hmm.
Could you go back 2 slides? Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry. Everyone else good? Okay. Oops.
The slides will be for sale after the talk. DVDs next week.
And this is where we move, in moving through subcreation, this is where Tolkien's particular voice really shines, because now we're dealing with Tolkien as subcreator, particularly with philology. So philology is the study of like language, the study of words, not literature, which is the study of like things composed, but this is actually the study of like language itself, grammar, word construction, like etymology, like all of that. And so Tolkien was a philologist by training. So like he understood that he devoted his life to scholarly study of languages. So like he was very proficient in a number of things, including Old Norse, Old English, Welsh. Some of his languages, I believe there's a language that's based on Welsh and Finnish that he constructed himself. Yes. He has, and you can buy it, he has his own translation of Beowulf from the original Old English into modern English. So he's, again, this is what he was doing. This is who he was. So he created language, and it was the creation of language that necessitated the birth of the story. So these are not just the only two, but like Quenya and Sindarin are two dialects of Elvish. Think of it as, so the first is like High Elvish, and this one is Gray Elvish. So like we're talking like, think of it as like, the first is like we're talking like very like high classic text written in Latin. Sindarin would be equivalent to having it transmutated through like vulgar Latin into like Spanish. You know, it's there, but it developed in its own way. There's a third Elvish language that no one speaks. That's the Noldorians.
Because I don't get the whole Latin thing. Would it be like Oxford English into modern slang?
Yes. Yeah, we're talking like the King's English versus.
Millennials.
Yes. Well, first of all, I'm a millennial.
Sorry, Jen, whatever he is.
Yes. You walk into a middle school today, and it's a whole different thing. That's exactly it. Define linguistics for me. Like, what does it mean to you when you say that?
I guess I think more of like how sounds are together to make words with meanings.
Yeah. So it's all wrapped up into that. Like this is a yes. Whereas, yeah. As opposed to a more scientific approach, which is like audiology or speech, like speech therapy, things like that. Yeah. Okay. So then we move into kind of the last big concept for today before we see it in action, which is myth. And it's important to understand what myth is not in order to speak about what it is. So myth is not allegory. It is not primitive science. It is not false. It is not a psychological projection. It is not falsehood dressed in like pretty language. And as we saw last week, Tolkien rejects outright allegory. Myth is also not like escapism. It's not, it's not withdrawal. But myth is meant to be an engagement with the idea. And so much so that myth is truth-bearing. Again, going back to the quote from Mythopoeia, I'll go back, don't worry. The heart of man is not compound of lies, but draws some wisdom from the only wise and still recalls him. Man, subcreator, the refracted light through whom is splintered from a single white to many hues and endlessly combined in living shapes that move from mind to mind.
So, to me, Lord of the Rings has always been classified as like a fantasy kind of world. Would that make Tolkien like go crazy in the head because he would consider it like a separate?
No, not necessarily. That's fantasy is what actually one of the quotes I used from his essay is that fantasy is a human right. So understanding fantasy properly ordered, we kind of like throw a lot under the umbrella of like fantasy, which I don't think Tolkien was necessarily, because in certain ways he's considered the grandfather, the father of the fantasy genre. But a lot of what, again, is classified as fantasy, I don't know that Tolkien would have been all that like thrilled with.
All myths are fantasy, not all fantasy is myth.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then coming back to this idea that myth is the path that truth takes when it refuses to remain confined to syllogism, which is like logic, like the study of it's major premise, minor premise, major premise, minor premise, therefore this. If this is, then therefore this is. Like it's how we logic, like it's basically a math problem for how we think. That's what a syllogism is. And that is not what myth is meant to be. It's a story that passes through our imagination so that we can come to understand it in a way that's not just academic, but the whole person can understand. And that's the whole point he has on fairy stories. It's what the whole point of fantasy is, to create, at least for his understanding, to be for us to come to understand truth, which is why we can say that there is myth in the Bible and not be like heretical, because it conveys truth through story. Which leads us to the idea of myth and recovery. See, fantasy helps us to see clearly again. It removes dull familiarity. It restores wonder. It enlarges our perception, deepens our moral seriousness, and reorients us so that he can say recovery is a regaining or a regaining of a moral view, a clear view. And this is what it really looks like. This is the idea that we should look at green again and be startled anew, but not blinded by blue and yellow and red. We should meet the centaur and the dragon, and then perhaps suddenly behold, like the ancient shepherds, sheep and dogs and horses and wolves. So, wrapping everything up for this first half, this is what we've accomplished, hopefully somewhat coherently. That creation is ordered. That human beings are made in the image of a maker. That we therefore subcreate secondary worlds. That myth is the highest narrative expression of that participation in creation. Which takes us to the next part. Movement the second. When song becomes world. So if the song beneath the story is real, does our world hold? And again, we look back at the Aino Lindale, the music of the Einar, which I won't read to you again. But just understanding that concept as we saw it play out. That Eru was the one, that there was great music, and that with the introduction of discord, Iluvatar wove that discord into a greater harmony. So we move to our first real clip, and I want you to think about these questions. Does this feel like a world that was invented yesterday? Or is it a world steeped in history? Does it possess weight?
The world is changed. I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth. I smell it in the air. Much that once was is lost. For none now live who remember it. It began with the forging of the great rings. 3 were given to the elves, immortal, wisest and fairest of all beings. 7 to the dwarf lords, great miners and craftsmen of the mountain halls. And 9 rings were gifted to the race of men, who above all else desire power. For within these rings was bound the strength and will to govern each race. But they were all of them deceived, for another ring was made. In the land of Mordor, in the fires of Mount Doom, the Dark Lord Sauron forged in secret a master ring to control all others. And into this ring he poured his cruelty, his malice, and his will to dominate all life. One ring to rule them all. One by one, free lands in Middle-earth fell to the power of the ring. But there were some who resisted. A last alliance of men and elves marched against the armies of Mordor, and on the slopes of Mount Doom, they fought for the freedom of Middle-earth. Victory was near. But the power of the ring could not be undone. It was in this moment, when all hope had faded, that Isildur, son of the king, took up his father's sword. Sauron, the enemy of the free peoples of Middle-earth, was defeated.
What do we think? Yeah. History. Go ahead.
Morgoth is Melkor's other name, correct?
Yes.
Morgoth gave Sauron the power to create the rings, correct?
Right. So Sauron was so what's not necessarily told here. So Melkor becomes Morgoth when he falls. It's usually how he's referred to by the peoples of Middle-earth as Morgoth, not Melkor, his angelic name. Morgoth takes to himself a lesser angelic being as his sort of like sidekick protege guy. That is Sauron, the guy with the ring, the big guy with the pointy hat.
Really tall guy.
Yeah, really tall guy. So he's actually like an angelic being. Should also be noted that those events took place 3,000 years before the events of the Lord of the Rings.
I mean, I'm sure a lot of us have like watched the movies. I've never read the book myself, but I mean, just in those few minutes, I feel like I've read so many books. Like, you know, like you said, like, you know, does it feel like it was steeped in history? Yes. Yes. I feel like I've read like Lord of the Rings. Like just those few minutes of it, you feel like you understand.
Awesome. So we move forward to subcreation, this idea of the inner consistency of reality. So does Middle-earth demonstrate consistency? So I guess the question as we reflect on this one, question is culture, geography, customs, and tone.
Nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to.
It's wonderful to see you, J.R.R.
You didn't think I was sure I could do most of this. So how is the old rascal? I hear it's going to be a party of special magnificence.
You know Bilbo? He's got the whole place in an uproar.
Well, that should please him.
Half the Shire's been invited. And the rest of them are turning up anyway.
So life in the Shire goes on, very much as it has this past age, full of its own comings and goings, with change coming slowly, if it comes at all. For things are made to endure in the Shire, passing from one generation to the next. There's always been a Baggins living here under the hill in Bag End. And there always will be.
To tell you the truth, Bilbo's been a bit odd lately. I mean, more than usual. He's taken to locking himself in his study. He spends hours and hours poring over old maps when he thinks I'm not looking.
Where's he gone?
That's really that part that Bilbo is narrating. It's really the part that I wanted you to point out. The idea that there's an entire culture. It feels like it's grown up inside the story, that the geography or the history is stable, that there are definitely customs embedded. There's always been a Baggins in Bag End. And this one points to the idea of limit and moral structure. So that focus here is on the ring itself, that it cannot be used for good. The power has its limits, and that moral law is not negotiable.
Strangers from distant lands, friends of old, you've been summoned here to answer the threat of Mordor. Middle-earth stands upon the brink of destruction. None can escape it. You will unite or you will fall. Each race is bound to this fate, this one doom. Bring forth the ring. Throw it.
So it is true.
A dream. I saw the eastern sky grow dark, but in the west a pale light lingered. The voice was crying, "Your doom is near at hand. Isildur's pain is found." Isildur's pain. Never before has any voice uttered the words of that tongue here in Imladris.
Do not ask your pardon, Master Elrond, for the black speech of Mordor may yet be heard in every corner of the West. The ring is altogether evil.
A gift to the foes of Mordor. Why not use this ring? Long has my father, the steward of Gondor, kept the forces of Mordor at bay. By the blood of our people are your lands kept safe. Give Gondor the weapon of the enemy. Let us use it against him.
You cannot wield it. None of us can. The One Ring arms us to Sauron alone. It has no other master.
And what would a rage know of this matter? This is no mere rage. He is Aragorn, son of Aragorn. You owe him your allegiance. Aragorn. This is Isildur's heir. And heir to the throne of God.
How that, Elvis?
Gondor has no king. Gondor needs no king.
Aragorn is right. We cannot use it.
You have only one choice. The ring must be destroyed.
What are we waiting for?
The ring cannot be destroyed, Gimli, son of Gloin, by any craft we here possess. The ring was made in the fires of Mount Doom. Only there can it be unmade.
What was seen in that as well actually points to what's coming next, and that's the idea that languages are real and that they are, in fact, spoken. Gandalf spoke the black speech of the Black Tongue of Mordor. Aragorn and Legolas, or Aragorn was speaking in Elvish, and you actually get more of that here from the Two Towers.
Found various things to the soldiers.
Oh, too many winters.
Or too few. Look at them. They fight. See their eyes. Boyahun. Nere Terai. Dan Carmig.
Veriahaku, Amar Nanederos, Aragorn, Ledindago, and Uri Otari.
After Dagathaya.
Then I shall die as one of them.
So we saw subcreation in action. We saw creation, we saw myth, we're moving to myth now. So we saw subcreation, we saw history play out, we saw a language alive, which now points us again to myth. So myth operates through pattern, it evokes recognition, it carries a moral resonance beyond the immediate scene. And for this, I point to the Return of the King, which is the lighting of the beacons. It is an ancient memory, it is symbolic communication, it participates across kingdoms, and it feels mythic because it communicates through symbol, not speech. So This entire system of beacons were built between Gondor and Rohan, a kingdom across the mountains, for whenever Gondor was under attack and needs help. So when Gondor lights the beacons, they need help. I guess just trust me. Apparently my clip doesn't work.
Waiting for connection.
Oh. Well,
There you go.
so these are the ends. They're not trees. Don't call them that. But they are... Well, that's Treebeard, yes. And he is shepherd of the forest, created by one of the, participating in one of the creations of the Ainur. But to bring it to a close, we will skip that and come here. Creation is music. Subcreation, participation, myth as truth-bearing, a world structured by harmony, a narrative disciplined within limits, mythic imagination grounded in order. So Middle-earth does not invent meaning. It reflects a conviction that meaning precedes invention. And that's why it feels ancient. It's why it feels weighty. And I submit to you that is why it holds. That we see within Tolkien's larger legendarium and his wider works, we see a Catholic doctrine of creation at work. We see a Catholic understanding of the human person at work. We see, which is what we began with, the metaphysics. We started, and it's talking about ontology, epistemology, how we come to know who we are, what it means for us to be. Everything that we believe becomes alive and undergirds everything that is happening. So it's not an escape, it's an echo. It's a vocation. It is who we are. We are creators because we are created. Any questions? How are we doing? Go ahead.
What just springs to mind to me is in Genesis, where God says, go with Adam and Eve and have kids.
Yeah.
Participate in my creation, making me alive. And this is the same thing, it seems like to me.
Yeah.
That
So
was done.
he said that he was brought to mind the Genesis 3, where God instructs to go forth and multiply, to have participating in that creation in our very human way, and to see it reflected in the creation of what Tolkien was doing. So yeah, absolutely.
So I was just curious, what you said about the part where Melkor, when he sings his discord, it said there that Luvatar, even when his when he thinks he's rebelling and doing all these different things of his own volition, that actually plays into the original plan and symphony of the Iluvatar. So I was wondering where like free will comes into for us, and is it mirrored in Tolkien's work? I don't know if there's anything.
So free will is, it's not necessarily touched on in that point, but we can extrapolate, right? So the freedom, I think, is that we still have to make the choice, right? So even though and this is how we hold free will and providence in tension, is that God knows what we're going to choose, but we still have to choose it.
Right.
You know, the idea pointing back to God knew that Mary would say yes. So she was conceived free of original sin, but she still had to say yes. So I think we can kind of like, again, extrapolate a little bit and see that even at play, that, you know, even though he's a higher being than man, or the men of Middle Earth, he still has to do the choosing. So it's just knowing that allowing bad to happen so that a greater good can come from it.
Right.
And that points to what theologians call God's permissive will. So.
Yeah, I saw the the mirroring of that a little bit. I was curious about if there's any further like details that kind of mimic that more in that, but I didn't know of any myself. I was curious.
Yeah. No, I'll have to see. I like that. Go ahead.
Oh.
Yeah.
I think, so for the fantasy, now I can see why the Lord of the Rings isn't an escape, which I always thought that people that were like really into fantasy films, and even myself when I get really into certain series and stuff, I would feel sometimes like it was an escape. You get into a different world, you can kind of escape your current world. And I can see now why Lord of the Rings isn't that, because it does echo truth, and it's applied to our everyday. We can extrapolate things that are truth from it. And so when somebody asked a question about like other fantasies too, and how like some of them are not what J.R.R. Tolkien would consider fantasy because they're so far gone from that. Is it because you can't find truth and you can't find, like, are there fantasies where it's like there is no truth and there aren't those like criteria of like things will just fall apart, there is not consistency?
Well, sure. You find that in almost any genre of literature, where people just write bad books, you know. But I think the ones that we will consistently go back to, the ones that we look at, the ones that we think of when we think of it, are always going to speak somehow to this idea. And that's what I think Tolkien was talking about, is that there's echoes of truth in everything, right? And the more that it reflects what we already know, the more real it becomes, which is why we can enter into the story and feel like we're there. So, I mean, the idea of escape, so like we are entering a new world, but we're not necessarily trying to do it so that we can like avoid the reality of what's going on, because only in a story that truly reflects the real do we actually engage with it.
Yeah, that's deep.
Do you have any
Go ahead.
knowledge of if J.R.R. Tolkien read or talked with Wittgenstein, Ludwig von Wittgenstein, who's a philosopher, grew up right around the same time he did. They were born 3 years apart, died about 20 years apart. But Wittgenstein was in Cambridge. He talked a lot about the philosophy of human nature as it relates to language.
Okay.
And really rejected a lot of the other philosophies previous to him as far as human nature. And that it's so much wrapped up into our language, which is fascinating, being that Tolkien developed the language before he wrote the book.
Yeah.
Which implies that he kind of held to some of those same beliefs. Interestingly, Wittgenstein said he was agnostic, but he held to Catholic way of living, and he was given a Catholic burial.
Interesting.
At Ascension Church in England. So it's very interesting that they lived at the same time, and they were so, both of them wrapped up into this idea of language being so important as far as how it represents our human nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure if there's a direct connection. There is a book that Holly Ordway wrote called Tolkien's Modern Reading, where it goes into the idea that he wasn't just stuck in 6th century, like, British grand epic poetry, but that he was actually very well read. So it wouldn't surprise me. I have not actually been able to delve. I own it. I haven't been able to delve into it yet. But yeah. So it's definitely a possibility, and especially considering what you're talking about. Yeah.
Kind of goes back to touch on the free will aspect, and I don't know if the Tolkien story echoes this or not, but so going back to the earlier slides, you were talking about created good,
Mm-hmm.
and then evil being the privation of that, and the disorder of the good that was created. And then you also made this statement of, but we're fallen.
Mm-hmm.
So, in thinking through all of this, I'm kind of tangled up in, so is the fallenness an inheritance of that disorder that was brought about, or was that part of the creation that, like, how does that all fit in with that aspect of it? I mean, I've always thought of it as the inheritance of.
Right, and that's what it is. So like it's an inheritance of a choice, right? And it's particularly when we're talking about us, that Adam and Eve were created good, they were created without sin, that they chose to sin, and that with them, when they fell, we bear that mark as well. However, we also, being created, each one of us still is created in the image of God, meaning that we still have a goodness to us. It's just that we have been marked through generation as a creature who understands, or at least is predisposed to choose the bad, to choose not God. So I would say that it's not the idea there that I think you're if I'm reading you right, is not that it was in there from the beginning, but that it was something introduced and it's just something that now exists within the world but doesn't define it. That makes sense.
Yeah, it is. That's what I was trying to separate, the aspect that's not an inborn created aspect of it. It was introduced because of the fall and therefore inherited therefore. But of course, the Creator, God, allowed all this to transpire because of free will. He's not a puppeteer.
Right.
It's all done in love.
Exactly. Next week, session 3, evil, sin, domination, and the corruption of the good. So, and so, maybe we'll answer it a little better next week. Thank you, everyone.